Okay, want to welcome everybody. Hope you had a wonderful week. Hope you're all healthy, staying safe. Today's class is sponsored by Lori and Jeff Golchin. This is in honor of two very special birthdays. It's in honor of the birthday of Marcia Weingarten. Happy birthday, Marcia. And it's in honor of the birthday of Talila Levy. Happy birthday, Talila. We wish you both, it should be a wonderful year, a year filled with blessings, of happiness, of good health, of nachas. And thank you very much, Jeff and Lori. We're going to study inside the text first, chapter 9 of the book of Deuteronomy. It's a very powerful chapter. And I'm going to ask Hannah, who's in New York at the time, but with the help of Zoom, there you go. She's able to put up the chapter there so that all of you are able to follow along. I want you to have the picture in your mind. This is a direct speech from Moses. So Moses is talking to us. And get the scene. We're standing on the other side of the Jordan River. Israel is in view. We can see the Holy Land right across the Jordan River. Moses is speaking to us in what will be his final address to the Jewish people. And in this final address, he needs to inspire us to stay the course. The course is not going to be a decade. The course is not going to even be a century, but it's going to be thousands of years that we have to stay to the mission of being a chosen people and everything that that means. In order to do so, Moses is going to have to remind us of what we've been through, what we have already experienced, what we've gone through. And some of it is going to be painful. Some of it is going to be difficult. He's going to remind them of what it was like going through the 40 years in the wilderness and the mistakes that we made and the errors that we made and the rebellions that we went through. And so some of it, of what Moses is going to say, is going to come across not as harsh, but as very painful. And you're going to pick up on that in Moses' own words. You're going to feel, you're going to sense the pain within Moses' voice, but at the same time, what Moses wants more than anything else is the ability to get across the message to the Jewish people that they have to stay focused on what the mission is in front of them. So let's read the text. I'm going to read it in English. Again, I want you to feel it not coming from me, Moshe Bryski, but coming from Moses himself, that Moses is speaking to you. Hear, O Israel. Right away, you start off a paragraph with Shema Yisrael, and we kind of get the idea. We know that this is going to be an extremely important speech. Shema Yisrael right away means, okay, this is going to be big. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Today you are crossing the Jordan to come in to possess nations greater and stronger than you, great cities fortified up to the heavens. So we're going into a strong land, powerful people living there. A great, tall people, the children of the Anakim, the giants who live there, whom you know and of whom you have heard, said, who can stand against the children of Anak? So understand you're going to fight against a formidable enemy. And you shall know this day that it is the Lord your God who passes over before you. As a consuming fire, he will destroy them. And he will subdue them before you, and you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly as the Lord spoke to you. Do not say to yourself, when the Lord your God has repelled them from before you, saying, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me to possess this land. Says Moses to the Jewish people, don't make the mistake to believe that you have been given this gift because you have been so great, because you have been so righteous, that it's all as a gift to you because you are just magnificent. But because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord drives them out from before you. various different interpretations how the latter part of this verse is going to be read. But the first part is very clear. The first part of this verse is, it's not because of your merits. Because in fact, the last 40 years, there have been lots of rebellions from you. And many a times God could have easily taken away this gift, the gift of the land of Israel. But yes, the nations that live there, they are a sinful people, they are a wicked people, and they don't deserve the gift of that land. Verse 5. Not because of your righteousness or because of the honesty of your heart do you come to possess their land, but because of these nations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you. They don't deserve to live there. And here's the most important part. In order to establish the manner that the Lord swore to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Comes back to this, God says, through Moses. God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God promised the patriarchs that he's going to give their descendants the land of Israel, and God will follow through on this promise. That's why it's called the promised land. It is because of that promise that God is giving it to us. Are you ready now for verse 6? You shall know that not because of your righteousness the Lord your God gives you this good land to possess it, for you are a stiff-necked people. Moses doesn't hide any words. You're a stiff-necked people. You're a stubborn people. Moses had called them this before, after the story of the golden calf. God had called them this after the story of the golden calf, and we're going to get around to it again in our studies. Verse number 7. Remember, do not forget how you angered the Lord your God in the desert, from the day that you went out of the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You have been rebelling against the Lord. Verse 8. At Horeb, you angered the Lord, and the Lord was incensed with you to destroy you. When I ascended the mountain to receive the stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant, which the Lord made with you, I remained on the mountain for 40 days and for 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water. Moses fasted for 40 days. He was like an angel at the time. And the Lord gave me 2 stone tablets, inscribed by the finger of God. And on them was inscribed according to all the words that the Lord spoke with you on the mountain from the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. So on the 2 stone tablets was engraved that which the revelation which you heard directly from the voice of God. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days and 40 nights that the Lord gave me 2 stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant. And the Lord said to me, arise, descend quickly from here. For your people, whom you have brought out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have quickly deviated from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten image. I want to point out words in verse 12 that we're going to eventually come back to. I want you to take a look at it so that you'll see. Notice what God says to Moses, which opens the door. If you are a good attorney out there, anyone listening that's an attorney, anyone listening that would have wanted to be an attorney in their lives, and your job is going to be to defend the Jewish people, whether you like this client or not, you're forced to take the client, us, our ancestors, and we have sinned by creating a golden calf, and yet you need to defend us. Part of your defense is in this verse. Because what God says to Moses is, for your people whom you have brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. God is kind of blaming Moses, saying, hey, they're your people and you took them out of Egypt. Moses will eventually say back, my people? I took them out of Egypt. Who told me to do it? I'm your messenger boy. Don't put it on me right now. But we'll come back to that. But notice here in the words, the Lord said to me, your people whom you have brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. Moses will have something to say about that. Let's go to verse 13. And the Lord spoke to me further, saying, I have seen this people, and behold, there are the key words again. It is a stiff-necked people. Verse 14. Leave me alone, God says to Moses, and I will destroy them and obliterate their name from beneath the heavens. And I will make you into a nation mightier and more numerous than they. So the Jewish people are hearing now, 40 years later, what Moses heard from God up above in heavens after that sin, that God intended to destroy them and obliterate them from beneath the heavens. Verse 15, Moses is now going to tell the Jewish people what he did after hearing the news. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain was burning with fire. And the 2 tablets of the covenant were on my 2 hands. And I saw, and behold, you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made yourselves a molten calf. You had deviated quickly from the way which the Lord had commanded you. So I grasped the 2 tablets, and I cast them out of my 2 hands, and I shattered them before your eyes. And I fell down before the Lord as before. 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water because of all your sins that you had committed by doing evil in the eyes of the Lord to anger him. So Moses goes back up the mountain, and there he will beg forgiveness of God for another 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 19. For I was frightened of the wrath and the fury that the Lord was angry with you to destroy you. And the Lord hearkened to me also at that time. Verse 20. And with Aaron, Moses' brother, the Lord was very furious to destroy him. So I prayed also for Aaron at that time. And I took your sin in the calf which you had made, and I burned it with fire, and I crushed it, grinding it well, until it was fine dust. And I cast its dust into the brook that descends from the mountain. And then at Tavera and at Massa and at Kivros Hataiva, you provoked the Lord to anger. This is not the only story of rebellion. You did this again and again. Verse 23. And when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land I have given you, you defied the word of the Lord your God, and you did not believe him, nor did you obey him. You have been rebelling against the Lord since the day I became acquainted with you. Read over verse 24. See the power of Moses' words. You have been rebelling against the Lord since the day I became acquainted with you. Ever since we met, Moses says to the Jewish people, you guys have been rebelling. Verse 25. And so I fell down before the Lord the 40 days and the 40 nights that I had fallen down because of the Lord had said to destroy you. And I prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, God, do not destroy your people and your inheritance, which you have redeemed in your greatness, and which you have brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not turn to the stubbornness of this people, to their wickedness, or to their sin. That verse 27 is the secret to so much of our prayers. When all else fails, what do? We remind God of our Zadis and our Bubbies. They were good. Maybe we're not that good, but we had some really, really great Bubbies and Zadis. Verse 28, lest the people of the land from which you brought us out will say, because of the Lord's inability to bring them to the land about which he spoke to them, and because of his hatred towards them, he has brought them out to slay them in the desert. What do you want history to say about this whole Exodus story if you slay them now? What was that all about? You thought you could bring them into the land of Israel, but perhaps you were too weak to do it. That's what they're going to say. Or you just hated them, so you really didn't want to free the slaves. You wanted to take them out to kill them yourselves. That's what history is going to say. Don't let history rewrite the truth. They are your people, verse 29, and your inheritance, which you brought out with your great strength and with your outstretched arm. That's the text of chapter number 9 of the book of Deuteronomy. We can take the text off now, Chana. As I said, I wanted you to read first the text of the words itself. I'll go on now with the background story and the explanation, but I wanted you to feel a little bit of the passion of Moses. And again, he's talking to them literally towards the last days of his life. And he wants them to hear these words. He wants them to know how upset God was when he was up in heaven. And he wants them to know the defense that he put on for the Jewish people. Let's talk about the golden calf. And it's going to not be just a one class. We're going to talk about this week and next week and the week after. The Torah is filled with many biblical stories. It's important that we keep in mind that although the story happened and the story is real and the story is true, that the Torah is not a storybook. It's not here to tell us stories. It uses stories, but it's not a storybook. There's a difference. The Torah is not even a history book. The Torah is first and foremost a book of teachings, a book of laws, a book of guidance, a book about the connection between the Almighty and man. It's a book of the mission statement of the chosen people. It's the manual for the chosen people. That's what it is. How to teach a chosen people how to act chosen. The Torah will use the medium of stories to bring these messages out and to capture our attention. It will teach us how to behave and how not to behave. So we're going to learn about character when we study the stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We'll learn from their character what type of character we should have. We'll learn about family struggles when we study the story of Joseph. We'll learn about the consequences of jealousy when we study the story of Joseph. Is it a fascinating story? Absolutely, the story of Joseph is fascinating. But the reason the Torah chooses to tell it to us is not because it wants to tell us a bedtime story, because it needs us to learn from it. That family struggles can lead to dangerous consequences, and jealousy can lead to dangerous consequences. And parents showing favoritism of one child over another could bring much damage into the world. We learn this when we study the story. We also obviously learn divine providence. We learn about miracles that will take place. We learn about God watching over his precious ones. We learn about the might of God. We learn about divine intervention when we study the story of the Exodus. But of all the stories of the Bible, I would say that one of the most difficult ones to accept or to understand, at least at first glance, is the story of the sin of the golden calf. I'm sure each of you can pick a few stories that you say is just as difficult. Maybe some of you would look at it as more difficult, but clearly the sin of the golden calf has to be one of the most perplexing stories of the Bible, because you will always come back to this one simple question. How can it be that a nation that just witnessed what they witnessed in the Exodus, the miracles of the plagues, all the miracles of the Exodus, the splitting of the sea, the singing of the song of faith after the splitting of the sea, which told us that they had absolute, complete faith at that time. You cannot read that song of faith that the Jewish people sang after the splitting of the sea and read the chapter of the golden calf and believe that they took place a little over 2 months apart. It simply doesn't work in the mind. How does that same people that sang those poetic words about their love for God and their faith for God are the same people 2 months later that will build a golden calf and say, this is the God that took us out of Egypt? And these are our parents we're talking about. They're our ancestors. They're not, if we're wise, they were wise too. We're not smarter than they were. How was it possible that our grandparents would do such a thing? And this is without even mentioning the 10 Commandments. They just experienced the revelation. They just got direct revelation of God, something no generation before or after ever experienced. Each and every single one of them heard the voice directly from God. And in this communication, in this revelation of the 10 Commandments that take place at Mount Sinai, What are they told in commandment number 2? Don't worship idols. So you're hearing it directly from the voice of God. The holiness and the intensity of the revelation was so overwhelming. As I mentioned, it's a once in a history event. It says that the Jewish people anticipated the revelation by counting down the days. We call it today Sfirat HaOmer. We count the days from Passover to Shavuot. They too counted the days from the Exodus to Mount Sinai, a period of 49 days. They counted down the days. The excitement was building until the moment of the revelation. How is it possible that just 40 days after this revelation, 40 days after the greatest revelation of godliness in the history of mankind, our ancestors are bowing to a golden calf? That's why I say it's one of the most puzzling stories of the Bible. We want to try to wrap our heads around it. We want to try to understand it. We don't want to, it's not about us forgiving our ancestors. That's between Moses and God and the Jewish people of that time. Our task is to understand it. If we understand it, then we could learn from it. But it's very hard for us to learn from a story if we can't relate to the story. If we simply just think that our ancestors were the crazy people and they were able to do such a thing, then I don't relate to it. I don't understand it. Then it's not me. It's not talking to me. But if it's in the Torah, then it has to be talking to me. If it has to be talking to me and I don't relate to it, then what I have to do is restudy the story. I got to look at the story again and say, what is it that I'm missing? What part of the story am I not getting right? What part of the story that if I relearn it and now understand it, I'm not forgiving them, I'm not putting the sin away and saying, it wasn't really a sin, but I can understand it. I could relate to it. I could learn a lesson from it. So there's so much that needs to be understood. What were they thinking? That God would just let them get away with it? That God wasn't seeing what they were doing? How could they believe that a golden calf was God? We also, I'll list first all my questions, have to fully analyze and understand the role of Aaron, the brother of Moses, in this episode, because he will play a central role. He was the one that actually made the calf. They came complaining to him. They came saying to him, we need you to make a new God for us. We'll understand that verse a little better soon. But he's the one that says, bring me your gold, bring me the jewelry. And he's the one that actually melts it and then this golden calf comes out. Now, how can this be? Moses' brother, part of this golden calf conspiracy? And he wasn't stripped of his job after the event. Moses does relate in chapter 9 that God was upset with him, but he was able to ask God to forgive him. And Aaron keeps his job. He keeps his title. In fact, it's after the event that he's officially made the Kohen Gadol, the high priest of Israel, after the story of the golden calf. Lots of questions. Lots of questions. So let's try to relearn it. If you have the images of the story of the golden calf from the movie, the Ten Commandments, or any of the other biblical movies, I'm going to ask you to put it aside. Let's try to look at the story from a different perspective, perhaps. Put aside some of the past images that we have of the story. So let's set the scene. The 10 Commandments were given. The revelation at Sinai takes place. Moses climbs the mountain. After the revelation, Moses is going up the mountain. He explains to the Jewish people before his departure that the revelation, the 10 Commandments itself, is just a small part of the teachings of the Torah. That what he's going to do is go up to the top of the mountain. He will spend 40 days and 40 nights with God. God will teach him the details of the Torah, the 613 commandments. He will then come down the mountain and he will begin the study groups. The lectures will begin, the classes will begin, the workshops will begin. There's going to be a lot of work to be done. Remember, or if you didn't study it, let me inform you, it's the Jewish people themselves that ask for this system. After they hear the 10 Commandments, they say to God, no more, we can't handle such powerful revelation anymore. So therefore, please pass it to Moses and let Moses pass it to us. And God acquiesced. God says, okay to that system. So Moses is now going up the mountain to spend the 40 days, 40 nights studying the Torah. And the first things that he will study are the laws of the Mishpatim, are the civil laws of the Jewish people. So many details that are given to him that Moses needs to comprehend. Moses will have the ability to ask God questions on it so that he fully grasps it. And then he'll come down and he will begin the teaching of Torah to the Jewish people. So we have the 10 Commandments, which is known by all, and we now have a part of Torah known by Moses to be taught to all of Israel. All of the Jewish people heard the 10 Commandments. That they all know. Part of the 10 Commandments, commandment number 2, no idols. Moses has a lot more information by the end of 40 days. The information that Moses has will make up both the written Torah and the oral Torah. The oral Torah is the Mishnah, the Talmud. All of those teachings are given to Moses by God in part of this 40-day, 40-night school that Moses has. So Moses is gone now, right? He's not with us. He's up the top of the mountain. We're below, just experienced the revelation. Days are going by, and we're getting anxious. They know 40 days. The problem is they began the count when Moses left them. So the day Moses left, they counted as day 1. But it took Moses a full day to get to the top of the mountain. So really day 1 was the next day. So when they're anticipating Moses' return, it's 40 days from when Moses left. The truth of the matter is it's going to be that he has a class for 40 days and 40 nights. And so there's going to be additional time of the journey himself. They expected Moses to return on the 16th day of the month of Tammuz. Moses' actual scheduled return was the 17th day of the day of Tammuz, 1 day later. The Torah will use the word, and this is in the book of Exodus, when the sin of the golden calf first takes place. What we're studying in chapter 9 is Moses repeating the story. The Torah will use a word about the Jewish people saying boshesh. Boshesh means disappointed in expectations. That's the translations. So there was a crisis going on because the people were disappointed in their expectations. And the commentaries explain that they were frustrated. Where is Moses? Where is Moses? How come he's not back yet? Why is he late? But the truth is that their anxiety began much earlier. Their anxiety began the day Moses left, because they saw Moses take no doggy bag with him. He took no sandwiches for the way. He did not have a backpack with anything to survive. And therefore, they were worried. Where is he? How's he going to eat? What happens if he doesn't make it? They knew the power of the revelation, how strong it was. And now Moses is going even a step higher, and he's going to be alone with God. What if Moses doesn't survive it? Then we're sitting ducks. We're alone here in the wilderness without a leader. We don't know where to go. We're just here for anyone to come and pick on us and destroy us. So this panic really begins early on. They needed their leader. They wanted their leader, and their leader was absent. He was gone. He was on a hiatus. He was on some type of vacation. And true, he told them this was going to happen, that he was going to leave, but he'll be back. But they did not trust that he was coming back. They thought something happened to him, especially when he doesn't come back on the 40th day. The panic breaks out. And because they experience that intensity of the holiness of the revelation, in their mind, they begin to believe that Moses didn't survive. And rumors start flying. We're stuck here in the desert. We have no leader. We're lost. We're left all alone. Moses is dead. He's not coming back. Now, I find so amazing about this is that this is the same nation that just weeks ago complained bitterly about Moses with the words, "Who asked you to take us out of Egypt?" You remember, they complained so many times, "Why did you take us out of Egypt? Who asked you to come? We were better off in the land of Egypt." But now that he's not with them, just for a period of 40 days, they can't make it. They can't survive. They said to Moses, "If you don't get us water," Moses says that they told me, "If I don't get the water, they're going to stone me to death." And suddenly the mere thought, the mere rumor that he's not coming back leads to chaos. They were separated from Moses for 40 days and they couldn't survive. How are they going to make it when Moses passes away? Begin to understand why this is such an important story for Moses to talk about right now. Jumping to book of Deuteronomy, Moses is about to leave the world. The last time I left for 40 days and 40 nights, things did not go well. This is not a trip for 40 days and 40 nights, my dear children. I'm leaving now for good. But you can't make the same mistake. You can't go chaotic on me. You're going to have to stay the course. You're going to have to get used to another leader. His name is Joshua. And then there'll be other leaders, and there'll be prophets, and there'll be kings. You'll have to learn to survive without me. But we clearly see from the story of the golden calf that they panicked with the thought of Moses not coming back. What will happen if the manna doesn't fall? Maybe it was only Moses that was causing the manna to fall. How will we make it if the cloud of glory stops leading the way? We're lost. We don't have a compass. We don't know where we're going. And the same question that Jewish people had throughout history. How will we make it without the temple? When the temple was destroyed, first by the Babylonians and later by the Romans, how are we going to survive? Will we survive? Will we be a Jewish people? Did they not have good reason to believe the day the Romans came in and burnt down the Holy Temple and exiled every Jew from Jerusalem, that there was no tomorrow for the Jewish people? In many ways, we spoke last week. Last week was the week of Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd of Tammuz, the yahrzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. How many newscasters were saying during the Rebbe's funeral that that's the end of Chabad? Chabad could never survive. We've gone through this in our history where the question is, can we make it without the dynamic leader? It's miraculous if you think about it that Judaism is still thriving today. After all of the how are we going to survive, going from the first time when Moses leaves, when Moses passes away, when the Jewish people have to go through a transition from Moses to Joshua, and they're so used to Moses, and they're so used to Moses' connection to God, and all the miracles that took place, and that won't be anymore. And yet we survived. How are we going to survive after the destruction of the temple? And yet we survived. Somehow the Jewish people continue to survive. And this is the powerful message of chapter 9. This is what Moses' speech is about. You're going to have to, this is not about me. It's not about an individual. It's about what the individual has been trying to teach you and accomplish during his entire lifetime. And that is connect to God, because God is eternal. God does have a relationship with us beyond Moses. God does have a relationship with us beyond the Holy Temple. God does have a relationship with us beyond Jerusalem. And as long as we could remember that the message of Moses was a message of connecting us to God, we can survive. Another point about the golden calf. Although there will be forgiveness, God will forgive the Jewish people. It's important to point out that you should not confuse forgiveness with compromise. I want to explain what I'm saying because it's an extremely important principle. The Torah is non-compromising. The Torah presents itself, this is the law. This is the word of God. You can protest it. You can violate it. You can stand on your head. You can argue against it. But the Torah remains. The law will remain. Just because there was this grave sin 40 days after Sinai doesn't mean we're going to drop the experiment. It doesn't mean, okay, it was too difficult, so we're going to change the rules now and make it a little bit easier for our ancestors. God may forgive them, but he's not changing the rules. He's going to forgive them for violating the rules, but he's not going to say, and therefore from now on, I'm going to make the rules easier. It's non-compromising. We don't accommodate the failure. The law remains. Whether this people will remain, we'll wait to find out. But the Torah is the key to creation. And the Torah does not change. The Torah does not accommodate itself to any age or to any weakness. But every age and every generation, every one of us, we need to accommodate our lives based on the Torah. The first generation will struggle. It will sin. It will rebel. But the Torah stands strong. It doesn't take away its demands. It doesn't take away its mitzvot. It doesn't say, okay, let's cancel the idol-worshiping one because it's too difficult. And slowly, slowly but surely, the nation will mold itself around it. At first, it's very difficult, especially the first generation. It's a whole change in ways of thinking. But slowly but surely, the Jewish people will mold themselves based on the Torah. We will become the nation of the Torah. We will become the nation of the principles of Judaism. We will become the nation of the mitzvot, of its laws. Does it mean we're all going to be perfect? No. Does it mean that we're all going to observe every single commandment? No, absolutely. We have our difficulties. We have our good days. We have our bad days. We have our good generations. We have our bad generations. But through thousands of years, every word of the Torah is still there. It has not changed. We go through different periods of time in our own generations. Ask yourselves, your parents' generation, your grandparents' generation, go 4 generations. Were they all religiously the same? No. We're all slightly different depending on circumstances, depending on did we live in the shtetl, did we not live in the shtetl? What type of community, what type of friends? So many different circumstances lead to how we ourselves observe and our own relationship with God about it. But the words of the Torah, the exact same text, letter for letter, that we study from is the exact same text that your parents had, that your grandparents had, great-grandparents had, going back 3,700 years, all the way going back to Sinai. And the beliefs of Judaism goes back even to Abraham. Forgiveness means that when you recognize that you have failed to live up to your principles and failed to live up to God's will, and you need to make a move, you make a change, that's when this same non-compromising God allows for forgiveness, allows for repentance. You follow that? It's not the same. It's not that God becomes compromising. God becomes forgiving. God forgives us for not living up to an ideal, but he won't change the ideal. He'll just challenge us to find another path to it, a slower path perhaps, but find your way to the ideal, because the ideal is a godly ideal, and the ideal ultimately is what's good for you. This is what the tabernacle was all about. This is what prayer is all about. This is what Yom Kippur is all about. It's about forgiveness from a non-compromising God. Asking a non-compromising God to forgive us. When the Torah will describe the rebellion, I mentioned to you earlier that the first stop, when they panicked, they did believe that Moses died. They had reason to believe that Moses didn't survive. He didn't have water. He didn't have food. The intensity of the revelation that they themselves experienced. The commentaries say that there was this vision that they saw in heaven of a coffin being let out of the heavenly chambers. Various different reasons that are given why they did believe that Moses died. So now let's begin. We're panicking. We're there. We're panicking. Moses is not with us. Will we survive? Who's going to tell us where to go? What's going to happen if all these miracles don't continue? Everything that happened up until this point with us in the Exodus was Moses driven. Moses came and told us that this plague was going to happen and this plague was going to happen. Moses had this staff. Moses was doing everything. Now Moses is not there. Where are we? We're not in some city right now. We're not in the land of Israel. We're not even in Egypt. We're in the wilderness. Without that cloud of glory protecting the way and showing us where to go, we got snakes, we got scorpions, we don't have food, we don't have water, we're dead. So the panic sets in. Where did they go with that panic? They go to Aaron. Aaron is Moses' older brother. Aaron is the high priest. And the Torah describes their demand of Aaron with the words, Vayikahel al Aaron. In Hebrew, that word al connotates that this wasn't a request. It was literally, they gathered against Aaron. It doesn't mean that they gathered in front of Aaron. It doesn't mean that they said to Aaron. What it means is they gathered against Aaron. This has mob connotations attached to it. Anytime this language is used in the Bible, it means force. It means threat to life. So now we add another element to this, that Aaron felt his life was threatened, that there was a mob around him, and they were making demands. Now we can all imagine that within any nation, there are all kinds of people. Everyone has different personalities. And when people panic, there's all kinds of ways that we panic. We represent ourselves and present ourselves differently. Various different people have different viewpoints as to what a demonstration is like. Some want to demonstrate with signs, some will petition, some will destroy businesses. People will respond differently under different circumstances. When panic sets in, we're not all the same. And that's within any nation, that there's going to be different types of responses coming from different people. Now we have a Jewish people. They are panicking, but they're not panicking exactly alike. There are different groups within the Jewish camp, and they are all panicking, but in a very different type of way. Some are depressed. Some are scared. Some cry. Some have strong faith. But there will be always those that are instigators, and they use their panic to create a mob mentality. We saw this behavior in the prior crisis that the Jewish people faced in the very first 7 weeks. Water, we need water. Some reacted, we're thirsty. Some were silent. Moses is going to have to figure this out. Some had faith. God will provide. Some complained. Who asked you to take us out of Egypt? Different people reacted different ways to the exact same crisis. There was no water. Same with food. Some cried, were hungry. Some kvetched a little bit. Some went to Moses and saying, you need any help? What can we do? Some said, let's see what God has in mind. And some, we remember the barbecues that we had in Egypt. Why'd you ever take us out of Egypt? So we see clearly that there are those amongst the nation that were capable of some very nasty comments. And we see in this case, some very nasty action. So again, as I mentioned to you earlier, those of you that are attorneys, or because we're Jewish, we all wanted to be an attorney, or I should rephrase that, our parents wanted all of us to be attorneys, we begin to see the defense of Aaron, how we would take this if we had to defend him in a court regarding the story of the golden calf. Nevertheless, the question will remain about his action. Because Aaron is the high priest, and shouldn't the high priest of Israel be stronger than any of this? And even if you want to say he feared for his life, so what? Our leaders stood up for their principles. They weren't afraid to lose their lives. Aaron's not afraid to lose their lives. Why would he give in to the mob? Why wouldn't he just risk his life and say, no way? Why wouldn't Aaron just stand strong? They always stood for their ideals and beliefs, and especially this is 40 days after Sinai. I'll leave you with another question. They demand from Aaron, Asay lanu Elokim. Asay lon, critical words to understand, because that's their demand, what they want. Asay lanu, make for us. Elokim is usually translated God. Make for us a God. Now, although we often refer to the episode of the golden calf as idol worship, it's possible that it didn't start out as such. It may have led to idol worship and been a violation of the principles associated with the second commandment. But if you read the verse closely of the book of Exodus as it is described, it seems more that the original mob wanted a replacement for Moses, not for God. Because they say, Asher yelchu lefanenu, they wanted someone or something to lead them. They say because this man Moses didn't survive. If they wanted a new God, what does it have to do with Moses surviving or not? So what they wanted Aaron to give them was a new Moses. But they wanted a Moses that Aaron could make. They didn't want another human being. And that's why they don't ask Aaron to take over. You wonder why they're surrounding Aaron and they're saying Moses didn't survive. So wouldn't it naturally be, okay, so he's the vice president? Aaron, now you are the boss. You lead. You tell us where to go. You tell us what to do. But they don't say that to Aaron. They say to Aaron, make for us a new Moses. You see, yes, they use that word Elohim, but Elohim is used throughout the whole time in the Torah as judges as well. Leaders are called Elohim. Aseh lanu Elohim could have meant, they say to Aaron, make us a new leader, but one that you'll make, one that you'll design. We don't want another human leader. Why? Because humans die. We don't want one of them human beings that die. We need a permanent leader that you will make, that you will create, that doesn't die. A golden calf that will lead us, that will never die. And wherever the golden calf takes us, that's where we're going to go. We're going to follow. And this way, we won't have this crisis again of a human being died. So you're thinking to yourself, this sounds so idiotic. You said you wanted to make peace with the story. You wanted to have a better understanding of the story. You wanted to know how to relate to the story. And you just took us so far away from reality. They wanted Aaron to make a Moses, not be a Moses, but make a Moses. So before you dismiss this as completely idiotic, the idea that they wanted Aaron to make a leader out of gold, I need you to think about their culture from where they came. Yes, there is a God above all. Us humans can't hear his words. We saw that after just the 10 Commandments. We couldn't tolerate it anymore. It's just too powerful. So us human beings are not at the level that we can hear the word of God. And Moses, too, who just climbed the mountain, didn't survive because it was too intense for him. So what we're going to need is God to channel his holiness and rest in a physical entity, but a physical entity that won't die from the intensity of the godly revelation. And then this physical entity that will receive the divine revelation and can handle it because it's not a human being, that will have the ability to walk in front of us and to lead us. Is that so far-fetched? Before you say yes, in the temple there was a room. In the Beis Hamikdash there was a special room. It was called the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies there was an ark. You're familiar with the ark because of Steven Spielberg. He made a movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was an ark. The ark was extremely holy, as was depicted in the film. You couldn't look at the ark and survive. What was in the ark? The 10 Commandments themselves, the actual tablets that Moses brought down the second time, and the broken tablets of the tablets that he just described in chapter 9 that he broke. That ark was extremely holy. It was the holiest thing mankind ever had, ever possessed. On the top of the ark, there was something called the Keruvim, the Keruvites. These were winged angels made out of gold with baby faces. The two cherubim, the two winged angels, were facing one another. And it was from in between these two cherubim, as their hands are depicted in gold towards each other, right in between these two angels, that is where God's voice would emanate from when he would communicate with Moses. Moses would stand outside the sanctuary, outside the Holy of Holies. He would hear the word of God calling out to him, speaking to him every time the Torah says, and God spoke to Moses saying, the voice of God was emanating from above the ark between the cherubim, between the two winged angels that were made out of gold. Interesting. The very concept that God rested in the Mishkan, that God rested in the tabernacle, that God rested in the Holy Temple. Holy Temple was a physical edifice. It was made out of gold and silver and copper. You're familiar perhaps with part of the garments of the high priest. The most famous and most holiest of all the garments of the high priest was the breastplate. On the breastplate, there were 12 precious stones. Each of the stones had the engravement of one of the names of the tribes of Israel on it. When there would be a question that no one in the generation knew an answer to, they would bring their question to the high priest. Not that the high priest knew the answer. They would ask the question of the breastplate. And the letters of God's response would light up from the names engraved on the breastplate. the letters will illuminate with the answer to their question. So that God can choose to utilize a physical object in order to communicate. It's not so far-fetched at all. What was Moses' staff all about? Right? Moses' staff performed all these miracles. He raised the staff, he hit the staff, he did this with the staff, and miracles happened. Was that staff not something physical? So according to this understanding, they weren't looking to have Aaron at least at first make a god. They were looking for a miraculous physical representation that would lead them. Just doesn't make anything right. What we're trying to do is restudy the story to try to say, how was it possible that they thought this way? We'll continue with this next week, going deeper and deeper into the understanding of the golden calf and why Moses is speaking to them about this at this very important, critical moment of our history. I want to wish everyone a very safe week, a healthy week. If you feel up to it, our shul is open. We have services on Shabbat at 10 o'clock. You're welcome to come. Do wear a mask if you do come. And we do sit socially distant from one another. Let's all pray that miraculously God brings an end to this virus so that life can return to its normalcy, so that we can all be visiting one another, caring for one another, embracing one another, studying together in one room. But until that time, we'll just stay in communication as best as we can. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.